The first day was really exciting. The second day is a little abbreviated, but hopefully just as exciting with like great conversations here to come. And the future of AI will have better clickers. Just some ground rules in the room. If you'd like to ask a question, blurting in is appropriate, or flipping up a name tag if you have one. If you're online, please use the Slido, and we'll be monitoring the Slido for questions and answering them if we can, if time provides. There's a QR code on the screen for you to go to the Slido website. Just reviewing some of the ground rules. Comments made in the workshop do not reflect I'll just read it. The statements and presentations during our meetings or events are solely those of the individual participants and do not necessarily represent the other participants in the room or the National Academy of Sciences. And just a reminder of our policy on preventing discrimination, harassment, and bullying. All forms of discrimination, harassment, and bullying are prohibited in any National Academy study activity. This policy applies to all participants in all settings and locations in which the National Academy's work and activities are conducted, including this workshop. And we're really excited because we are a very apolitical platform and workshop, and would like to be able to use this to have a very meaningful dialogue. So we had 3 panels yesterday, and today we have our 4th panel. Well, okay. We have our 3rd panel. We're going to finish up our foresight activity, and we'll have readouts from each of the breakout rooms about what they see as they were given guidelines that we'll discuss, and the future of a positive, a negative, and a business as usual future for AI and drug discovery, and walk us through a narrative on how we might end up in those futures and how we might avoid them, and what stumbling blocks there might be along the way. And then following up, we'll have a great discussion about citizen science and what other communities are doing and examples we can look to increasing the community in thinking about drug discovery, and so we can have access for everyone with medicines, that right now might be challenged for different populations, different areas of the country. I'd like to thank the Chemical Sciences Roundtable. On the left, we have the planners, and on the right, we have the panelists. But a special thank out to the planners, Marty Burke, Linda Chin, Carlos Gonzalez, Sammy Coelho, Nikki Pohl, and Laurel Royer, who helped bring all the speakers together and this great discussion. And this is the roundtable members. This is the National Academy's activity, so it does include volunteer roundtable members as well as ex officio members from the government to help consult with. And the staff here is I'm the Chemical Sciences Roundtable Director. Darlene Gross, Kay Wims, and Apoorva Dave are some of the staff that have helped out on this. And Eric Edkin is in the back making us look good and running the show for us. And a lot of thanks to the events and communication staff here who helped set this up. Our last workshop that was in February 2024 on fair data is now available online. So if you follow the QR code, you can download the proceedings and brief. This workshop will also have a proceedings and brief that academics and others can use as a document when they're, when they're thinking about this activity. It'll also be sent to stakeholders and policymakers in the U.S. government and around the country. We have a call for experts right now. We have a couple empty seats on the roundtable, so this QR code will send you to the nominations page for the roundtable. And our past 3 webinars are available online, so if you'd like to go back and watch the videos from this year on AI and sustainability, scalability, or limited data, they're available for you to watch. And sorry I'm rushing through this because I'm really excited to get to this panel. And this year our topic is for the for the CSR is chemistry in 2050. What does it look like? How are we going to get there? And what do we need to do now to successfully reach that mid-century point? Our first topic is Chemistry 2050, Chemistry in Space, and we're planning on a webinar in April 14th, a couple of months, and we have a couple of speakers lined up already. This is our first panel. Sorry, I'm just going to okay, so sorry about that. But let's get on. So right now we're going to, I'd like Laurel to come back to the podium, and we're going to have the readouts from the different groups on their foresight activities. The first one up will be a positive future. What is AI and drug discovery look like in 2050? Laurel, come on. I hate being up here alone. So I'll let Laurel describe what we did yesterday, and then we'll bring up the first group.
Good afternoon, everyone. So yesterday we had a breakout session, and we had folks working, we had folks thinking outside the box, we had folks changing lanes, because much of the presentations were very focused in areas of expertise, areas of interest, areas of development that individual speakers were focused in on their day-to-day. And we wanted folks to kind of weave a little bit and push the envelope some and think through what 3 different futures might be. And Michael and Apurva developed with support from Dr. Aaron
Carmel.
Carmel, these 3 distinct scenarios: a positive future, a negative future, and sort of like a middle of the road. We've made some advances, but slow, and things are much the same. And folks broke out into 3 rooms with a facilitator, and were able to kind of think through. I think we heard it was a little bit difficult to stay on task, but the idea was that we would be sitting in 2050, looking back at what led us to that particular scenario we were sitting in, and thinking through what are some of the turning points and the points in history. I think for our middle of the road group, for example, we were like, oh, I remember that date in 2020 when, a bomb dropped on the NIH and funding was just, significantly cut or something like that. So if the first group, positive future.
Nikki and Ben want to come up and.
Yes, I think we're going to have a little performance maybe.
No? Oh, no, not from them.
Not from them. Okay.
Yeah, I was in that group. Yeah.
Okay.
So I'll stand close by. Oh.
So I'm going to start with a positive future, which was interesting because we oftentimes had a problem veering back into the negative, thinking not about 2050, but thinking about yesterday, for example. One of the things that came out loud and clear that we see in 2050, everything is going to be far more individually human-centered, where the human gets to decide, for example, if they have a problem, whether that be a cochlear implant decision or treatment of cancer or whatever. We would not, as a culture, define what is disease or what is not acceptable. There would no longer be the social pressure to define something. We also were thinking that there would be a lot less stress as AI and automation took over a lot of the more stressful work, and that humans could really focusing on flourishing and making decisions around this. And then the drug discovery paradigm would be shifting much more toward health span. That also came up yesterday, than it would be on lifespan. The big uncertainty was, could our human organizational institutions evolve fast as quickly as the science and technology? Because we saw that as a big variable. Science and technology is very rapidly advancing, and we can certainly see that in 2025, that we have hit upon the limitations of a lot of the cultural, educational, governmental, health, business infrastructures and ways of doing things that have been around for decades are starting to really creak and fall apart. We have to really be very creative on that. And that was one of our big uncertainties, because how well we as a community, starting out with the scientific community, solve the human organization problems will be very much determining whether we get to this rosy positive future that we envision compared to what we're going to hear about next.
Yeah, I think some of the other ideas we were thinking about was the initial pitch was talking about more drug discovery timelines and things like that. And we had decided as a group, we liked the phrasing more of therapies and timelines of therapies across a patient's lifetime, shortening and reducing over scale. And also that kind of as you were talking about everything being more patient-centric and community-centric as far as both treatment plans, access, but also privacy concerns. And a lot of our conversations were around when and where is privacy consent given and how open or not open is that. And one of our discussions and challenges was how is the trust going to change from where it is currently to where it could be in this positive future. And so that was one of those flipping points we kind of discussed as to possible things in the future that would change all of this. I do remember we talked about as far as like scenarios, there was one scenario where we had a lot of conversations around sort of wearables and the idea of ongoing data being collected and the idea that just as because your wearable is checking you, it redoes the treatment plan, talks with a possible automated delivery process that says, oh, this is your next schedule of routine is now we're going to modify it slightly. Very low stakes effort on the patient's part. It gets autonomously delivered to you somehow, and it doesn't really become an add-on to your day to, I have to go physically inconvenience myself to get my own treatment. Thank you for delivering it to me. And that's just part of that's the accepted process of the patient's experience.
Yeah, so part of getting to that future was we realized that the time of physical processes such as chemical reactions, chemical sensing, diagnostics is going to have to be accelerated to the same speed that we've seen the acceleration of communication. Because without that, we're not going to get into that hyper-individualized on-demand delivery of therapies and treatments so that the human can determine where they would like their health span to go. So we saw a lot of the necessity for reducing time in these processes because time is going to be money. And so in order to reduce the cost of an individualized therapies, it has to be addressed at a much faster time scale. And so we see a lot of the data issues, data privacy issues, even on the chemical space, how do we get reactions to be far faster so that we could to produce a chemical on demand and go through a very basic safety profile of something new on a time scale that cannot be months or years. It has to be days to be able to be most useful.
I think one of the other issues we discussed as far as like requirements is the idea around data. A lot of the issues we have currently, we're talking about data right now as far as like having enough of it, having the right kind of it. We're like, well, this is our positive future. That's solved. We already know that. And so we did a lot of like, well, how does that happen? We're not quite sure. And so a lot of that was also around the concept of possibly having semi-anonymized training data for ML to be used in the sense that with the consent idea, how is there a way to partially consent to certain things? There was that example from the panel last week of like opting in for that second vial of blood from the one panel. Is like, how does that opt into a lot of these ongoing with wearables and everything like that? And that was one of the concerns and things we were trying to keep track of. And I think the other idea we were talking about is that there's a lot of infrastructure we kept talking about in terms of both data, but also power, energy, and research, research funding and things like that. And there was the idea of moving more towards an idea of our research now is going to be more of like grand challenges, not necessarily very specific things we need to solve right now. It's like, oh, we have the time now to look after this awesome new thing and let's go for it. And so that was where some of our conversations of where we thought research might be in the 2050.
And then we also saw to do that, we'd also have to, as scientists, reorganize our human organization for how we think about and do and fund science, that it becomes more community and society oriented, allows interdisciplinary teams while still maintaining individual creativity at the individual researcher level. So that includes students, postdocs, technicians, everybody, not just the lab leader, for example. And how do we find systems where we can really tap into all that talent in a way that drives everything forward, and including setting up incentive systems and setting up reward systems so that we make sure we get to that utopia.
Right, yeah. Yeah, I think we had the example of going back to like the space race, in the sense that everyone in the building is like, we are going to the moon. And like, there was going to be that sort of same feedback and vibe from everyone in a community driven, like, we are doing this, let's go.
Exactly. Because if robots and AI is doing a lot of the cleanup work, for example, and a lot of the works that we don't necessarily enjoy doing right now, that frees up a lot of human beings to think about these other processes, including the care work and how we can get more individualized solutions that are more determined by the human themselves, as opposed to determined by what is financially feasible at the moment, because you need such massive scale infrastructure to be able to get a single drug to market, for example. Yeah, so I was hoping we'd end this because we we see a really positive, exciting future. But the determining point really, and we see it very clearly now, is how do we organize ourselves as human beings to get to this future that is where each person, no matter where they are in the world, ideally, but certainly here in the US, can be determine their own health span, their own future, and be able to decide when their data will be used, and would also be able to get the feedback to know, oh, I helped this, or my grandmother helped this new process, a new way that we can come together as a human. It's part of, I see, as our human evolution is the sapient part, and that's what we really need to start focusing on evolving. And we as scientists and engineers and as community members have a huge part in bringing this positive future to the fore. Because we, in our discussion, oftentimes said there's a fine line between utopia and dystopia. And it really comes down to human organizational structures to veer us toward the utopia. So with that, I guess we'll hear about some of the more dystopic futures that if we don't follow this trend, if we just focus on the chemical reaction, we might be going into a different space that we'll hear about next. Thank you.
Yeah, the negative future, the less than positive future, the oh.
I'm very good at speaking into a mic. All right, I'm Lara Campbell.
And I'm Vikram Venkatram.
And imagine that we are in the forest in a little cabin. It's raining and cold, and there's water like leaking through the roof because, you know, we don't have the wherewithal to fix it. So we're huddled in here just having a chat.
How's your family?
Well, we just had the funeral for Cousin Ray. He was, I think, 55, but it's kind of good that he passed because, you know, he was real sick these last 10 years.
Yeah, my mom's blood pressure is really high. She's diabetic, and I think maybe her memory's not doing too well, but what exactly can we do about it?
You know, when my mom was little, the US used to have the very best medicines, she tells me, like for everything. But then she and Grandma, they never really believed in all that AI stuff.
Yeah. Well, we made the first car, we made the internet, we made chips, whatever. That was then, this is now. Did you hear how famous guy Jones, that big shot company owner, he just got more of the latest infusions from nefarious country? He's like 90, and they say that he's gonna run his megacorp for like 20, 25 more years at least.
I know it, man. Nefarious country and their allies, they have the best AI, the best chemistry, all the tools. They've got all the stuff, but we just get the cast-offs, unless, of course, you're really, really rich, like a megacorp owner.
I don't know about you, but I'm trying to get a visa there. I think that my US degree, my master's degree, might be able to get me like an entry-level job at like a factory or something. And then, maybe I can learn some AI tools and like work my way up the ladder, get like a nice management position and send some money back home to my mom.
Yeah, I hope that for you. Good luck.
Well, getting out of the part now, the US missed out on the molecular industrial revolution. It was the next huge technological advancement, the chance to take control of human health and improve it for everyone. And this could have all been avoided if we had addressed just a few things. The first, challenges with data, intellectual property, and strict regulation made it challenging to innovate and approve the newest cutting-edge medications for use. We weren't able to shift market incentives. Entrenched pharmaceutical companies stuck to their old model of drug development, blocking innovative personalized therapies, and investors didn't invest enough into AI-driven drug discovery. We also didn't think creatively enough. We stuck to old chemistry instead of innovating and finding new methods that better fit with AI and other forms of automation. But others didn't make these mistakes. So all of the big advancements, the most important of this century, happened outside of the US.
Does anybody else from our team want to chime in?
So have that.
Oh, do we?
Yeah.
Oh, great. There's more. So I can turn the page. All right. So we could have done better at building delivery systems so that we could get the medicines that we did make into the hands of sick people, and through that, improving the trust that we have with the communities that we seek to serve. We overall did not do an effective job building trust. And of course, the continuing spread of disinformation and misinformation in this poor future, we failed to address that. We didn't engage with the communities in a way that built those overall trusting relationships. And of course, workforce challenges are core to this. This is something that the group discussed a lot. We really need to have the people who have both the AI skills, the manufacturing skills, and the chemistry skills to realize a better future. And supply chains. That's part of the ecosystem that Vikram was talking about. So, of course, we have to have the workforce as part of that ecosystem, but also the manufacturing and control of the supply chains so that nefarious country doesn't dominate it all.
If only we could go back and do it all over again.
Professor Paul, aren't you glad we went first? That was a Grammy award winning. Yeah, so now the business as usual. Is someone joining Andrew? Dr. Nan, former director of the Chemical Sciences Roundtable at the National Academy of Sciences.
Oh, I don't think I'm ready to do a skit. I'm nauseous. I did come up, or maybe you want to talk about this, and then I'll just talk about, like, I came up with some ideas about how we got here.
So we aren't as creative as the group B that we just saw. So just going to read to you all, hopefully not in monotone, what we pictured the middle ground to look like based on circumstances that we see today and how it's been progressing stepwise into the next 25 years. All right, so despite the promise of AI and its utility for streamlining processes, the year 2050 has a grim outlook for American healthcare. So we focus on the great USA. After years of austere federal budget cuts and resistance to organizational changes, the regulatory agencies, pharmaceutical industries, and academia are left stagnant, even as AI continued an exponential improvement path. The cost for publishing in peer-reviewed journals has become prohibitively expensive as open access models continue to dominate the publication business structure. Paper mills generated from AI bots have also polluted the publishing space. These two factors have contributed to the breakdown of the reward structure for a traditional tenured track professor, which then disincentivizes new talent from entering this space. This stagnation has paralyzed the drug discovery, validation, and drug evaluation process, making AI's benefit as an enabler for productive research negligible. Access to human health data to train AI models is also limited due to the decades of structural inequities and misalignment of financial motives. Cheaper and individualized medicines are made, but they're designed and produced for those in the social elite demographic. Also, so while all this is happening in the great wild, wild west, this new emergence of, what do we call it? Nutraceuticals have developed, where AI has been captured by the homemaker market, and people in their homes are now creating their own supplements using organic and all natural resources, FDA approved sources, and selling them on the streets to those who want to lead a better life. And this is the world that we live in 2050.
Thank you. This is kind of like, how do we arrest progress, to stay at this point? So I thought about some mistakes or policy decisions that might lead us to sort of arrest AI for drug discovery progress. So one of the things we discussed was the revolutionizing the FDA Act of 2032, which moved from requiring efficacy to only requiring safety data, which then meant there was a new category of drugs being approved by the FDA, but then you had to get it approved by insurers. So then insurers were the decision makers on what is an efficacious drug and what is not. So that actually reduced the number of drugs that patients who could not afford to buy them out of pocket could get covered by insurance. And then, today in 2025, the number one source of clinical trials, the number one person running them is principal investigators from universities or research institutes. And so to sort of imagine how we could reduce the number of clinical trials so that we don't have a bunch of new medicines, one source was basically the Revolutionizing Clinical Trial Act of 2030, where the government increased the amount of regulatory burden and paperwork and cost to run clinical trials to better protect patients, thereby pricing out academics and places like the NIH from funding clinical trials themselves. And then basically another point, and this was in 2027, there was the Fair Copyright Law passed in part by lobbying from the Publication Forum, which basically made it illegal to train any generative AI methods on copyrighted material unless they negotiate a license. And all the publication groups basically got together to make a clearinghouse for training on copyright. And only the top 2 AI labs could afford this price. And so the only available AI tools were from the top 2 big tech companies. And then basically at this point, there was no ability for academics to train AI models. And then there was an increase from the federal government to make open access be required for 100% of funding. But unfortunately, there was no change in how open access worked. And so academics were now putting 50% of their budgets towards paying open access fees, which were mandated by the federal government to be paid. And then at the end, in this vacuum, big tech companies realized that people still want to be healthier, and this led to the Nutraceutical Act of 2040, which made it basically allowable for companies to direct to consumer market new ideas for treating health disorders. So those are some interesting policy decisions that led us from 2025 to 2050 to be in the same place we are today. The end.
Could open up for questions. But I just had a thought. I don't know, maybe I missed this. When I think about the positive future, it was science and technology. If we stayed in the past, it was mistrust, and regulatory science was going to keep us from moving forward. So I don't know if that was me looking at from 30,000 feet up, but I mean, I thought that was a really interesting view. But there's a lot of commonalities between the three futures.
No, I think what they showed us too is that as chemists, I think we all agree that chemistry is life. And the chemical enterprise is not just laboratories, the researchers, and the manufacturing. And we have an opportunity today to define what the chemical enterprise should be to sort of like be the catch-all, right? And we don't let people fall off to the wayside. So I think we're on a right track, at least within the CSR for the programming this year, to continue refine and redefine what the chemical enterprise is, and moving from today, when we all go back to our respective lanes again, that we can be reflective on perhaps who's missing from our teams, even if it's like in brainstorming, allowing us to think through accessibility. Are we catching all of the items and the nuances that we need to, right, to avoid this sort of like doomsday reflection in certain scenarios, particularly as it relates to these designing tomorrow's medicines.
So why don't we open it up for discussion? But can we play the game? State your name if you have a comment to share, for the record.
Nikki Paul, I'll start. So we thought that trust is very quick to be broken and it takes a long time to get back. So we assumed that 25 years was not long enough to rebuild trust. And that's why we were trying to come up with a system that could still be utopic, but that we figured, you can trust maybe 300 people. So it has to be community-based trust, but then you also need to commoditize a lot of the things that we think of as like a therapy, such that it becomes something that's universally accessible, just like clean air should ideally be universally accessible, and clean water. And this would be in the health span, treatments would be in the same span, but they would still be what we would consider today in 2025 very high tech, which means we need to find much faster, better ways of diagnosing and sensing and being able to develop the technologies so that everything is way, way faster, just like communication is far, far faster now. Data analysis is far faster now than it was 25 years ago. So we can just keep projecting, even at the current trajectory, how that's going to continue accelerating. And now we need to be able to accelerate that in the chemical, physical space also, to get to the point where it becomes a commodity. So that it becomes so cheap that it can become affordable, and then it can be community controlled, and therefore slowly rebuild trust with overlapping communities, where it's clear that you have agency as an individual to be able to share your data for how this therapy worked in your particular case. And you decide which data that you'll contribute. And then you would also get the feedback when that helped move society forward. It wouldn't just be going into a black hole. And with accelerated better communications, you can easily envision ways that would be very quickly possible, in the way that writing a physical letter, it makes it much more, not a scalable solution. But that's why you heard trust, because we do not think it takes just 25 years to rebuild trust. That takes sometimes hundreds.
And jokingly, in our room, I was in the same room with Nikki. The future is us with just grayer hair. Judith.
Judith Burston, National Science Foundation. Something that we discussed, that I was in this stasis scenario group, and one of the things that started this off and essentially was the disinvestment in the federal research enterprise, which then laid the groundwork for and essentially pulled the rug out from under things like clinical trials and other research, and therefore laid the groundwork for some of these transitions that Andrew mentioned.
Oh. James Lee from Come to the Bio. I was in the more optimistic group, but there are two observations that struck me a little bit. One is just continue on the positive scenario. It's actually, while we talk a lot about the resource and the environment, the path to get there, the end state in the future actually costs less because you have a healthy population, you have more productive population, and the amount of efforts that you have to spend on medications, surgeries, and stuff to fix people are going to dramatically decrease. And you're going to have a larger productive workforce. So it's almost like you may have a high activation barrier to get there, but the ultimate state actually costs less. So the question is almost like, what are the best way to foster the ecosystem so that not only the public but also the private sector collectively can invest and move the state forward. And the second observation we had is the while we are in the more optimistic scenario, we do think the gap or the boundary between the optimistic one and the pessimistic one are not that far apart, because the thing is, because the technology is more advanced, it's easy to fall into the traps and get into the bad scenario, and actually you can do it in a more accelerated fashion. So the question and the thinking there is, what are some of the guide rail we put in place, and what are some ways and the decentralized idea, the local community, the trust as being a key theme, where it's almost like you get more innovation, you get more autonomy and more options in a decentralized fashion, which would ultimately help you to stay in a situation that doesn't fall into traps due to actions of select individuals or agencies.
Linda Chen at City Health. I agree. I wanted actually two observations. One is just following up what James said. It struck me as I hear about the readout from the other group is the overlap of what we can be doing leading to that future, so similar, and there is no black and white answer. I mean, regulatory, stagnation, rigidity, or not of it, there is not an on and off switch. It's a matter of balancing and picking the right balance. And so I think a little, what seemingly isolated decision can have broad reaching implication in this case because of the nature. The second thing that we had a lot of discussion in our group about the negative future is there's a focus on what we are doing or not doing about AI, automations, and chemistry. And there's, from investment to, regulation perspective. But I think we feel really strongly that the ecosystem needs to be there. The workforce, the supply chain before, and the delivery system after, that ecosystem that allow us to benefit from all these innovations. And that comes back, that ecosystem is already starting to collapse or not being supported. And again, that is, a factor that really is, I think, common to all three scenarios. And the degree of that ecosystem being supported is going to have great impact over, which future we ended up in.
So to what James was talking about too, imagine agriculture, about 1900, people spent about half their income on food. And you look at many countries in the world, they still spend a huge chunk of their income in food. So when we say that grain prices went up 10, 20%, that's catastrophic for huge numbers of human beings. But in the US now, we have less than 2% of the population in agriculture anymore. And we eat far better and more varied produce and more varied diets than we had in 1900. And so you can imagine healthcare going the same direction, where it starts to shrink the amount of energy that we're having to put as we start. You look at how much automation and technology development in the agricultural space led to that taking up a far smaller part of the GDP. You could see something similar happening with healthcare and health span, especially by commoditizing and making it democratizing and having this into a different space. And that leaves a larger fraction of humans to expand another space. It could be cultural and arts, and education could start taking a much larger piece of the economic pie, so to speak. But we saw it as a very positive thing if that, ideally there would be very minimal use of or need for healthcare and drugs and therapies, because we would have societies who would be planned to promote health, and that would free up a lot of human capital, if you want to look at it from a capitalistic sense, to do other things that would promote human flourishings. But it all comes down to what Linda said, is like, how do we set up systems? We're already starting to see individual states trying out different healthcare experiments, right? And that's certainly the federalist system in the US was, in its ideal form, allows you to run 50 different experiments potentially, and then the best ideas can percolate through in the ideal case. You could even go to more hyper local level. It depends, we're still at the stage where all this costs a ton of money. So we have to see how we can very quickly reduce time so we can reduce costs. And then that allows a lot more ideas to flourish at individual community levels, because each person's individual community also sets values. Because one of the things we talked about too is that we don't want to impose something. For example, when I talk to my deaf colleagues, there's a lot of turmoil about cochlear implants, and that is an entire cultural community that you could see from a health point of view, hearing is the norm, and so we're going to enforce that norm in some way. And we wanted to make sure that the utopia allowed each person to decide what it was that they defined as health and their health span. It wouldn't be some outside thing that we'd say, well, we think that's what you need. You have to be hearing like the rest of us. And you can think about many other aspects of health and being that can be determined that way. And that can drive the technology development, because we have this very homogeneous view of Homo sapiens.
Yep, Ben was first.
This is Ben, right? I was in the positive group, and I was just curious to the other two groups. We kept sort of mentioning the positive group, where we're like, not a dystopia, we're in a utopia. So that sort of truncated some of our conversations, where some of our ideas or thoughts kept going. And one of them was around this privacy issue, with the idea of like data breaches and data leaks, and what happens when a adversarial, nefarious country all of a sudden has all of your very high level data. And I'm curious what the other two groups, who are not the utopia conversation, were doing and had about that, because I'm not sure in the scenarios described so far it was alluded to, but not necessarily. So I'm kind of curious what the overall conversations there were.
I think your two neighbors can answer that question.
I don't think we specifically talked about
Can you
data.
give us your name?
Oh, Linda Chen. I
Oh,
don't think we specifically talk about data breach. But I think that's a really, really good point. We sort of, at least in my mind, put that under the vulnerability US would experience, would be susceptible to when the control is in the hands of, an adversarial nation state. So from there is, we set medicine, but we should include data, in that outcome description.
One of the things that we did talk about, though, was the lack of data standards, and that by not having and promulgating and organizing standards around how data is shared, we are just totally left behind. So other groups organize either trust, schmust, who cares about it, we're taking all your data, which is one philosophy, or whatever. They work past it so that diverse types of data, including all of this private health data, they have access to it, and for whatever reasons, we didn't.
One more in the back.
Vikram Venkatram, CSET. Yeah, I think echoing some of the themes that have been coming up in this conversation, one thing that struck me is that all three scenarios were actually very optimistic about the power of this technology. In the negative outcome, we had our lifespan extending drugs, and in the sort of middle tier outcome, there's the nutraceuticals. And so it seems like a lot of the focus is actually very in keeping with the title of this workshop on building access to tomorrow's medicines, and a really key issue being, well, if we really are optimistic about what this technology can do in the future, the key issue is like, how can we get it to as many people as possible? And in particular, how can we get it to the people who need it the most? And so I think, we've talked about building up the ecosystem and delivery systems. And I just think it's very interesting that even when we had our most negative hats on, the vast majority of our conversation in the negative group was very focused on, policy issues, economic issues, and much less on sort of the key potential of this technology to actually accomplish something.
Judith and then Laura.
So in the middle scenario group, this is Judith Burston from the NSF. In the middle scenario group, I would say that what the focus was on the siloing of the information. In other words, it wasn't that there wasn't progress in certain spaces, but that it wound up siloed and therefore not broadly accessible. And so it wasn't that there wasn't development or utilization of the AA technologies. It's just it looked very inward and reinforced the status quo.
Laura.
Laura Campbell, that's very in keeping with your status quo goal. So I was thinking about the extent to which all of our discussions included the idea of trust, and just putting out for us to discuss how might we now, as people who do not generally engage with the broader public, think about how we build that trust. How do we help communities around us understand the opportunities that are there, and that a better future could be realized if we do smart things carefully?
I'd say one of the significant gaps is in communication to communities. And we talked a little bit in our meeting earlier around what informal chemical education looks like. We don't do a really good job of communicating chemistry at a fundamental level to the general public, right? Because I think still today, the engagement with the people outside sort of like that immediate enterprise are really just viewed as consumers, right? Whether it's with the drug industry or personal care products or cleaning products or whatever it is. And so it's just a group of people to have the outputs of the chemical enterprise be sold to, who will consume it. But we don't have the conversation about what it is and the actual outcomes of a lot of the research and thinking and strategies that are actually happening inside of rooms like these in labs and things, right? So we teach students too, like, you have to be able to talk about your work at a 5th grade level or 8th grade level, right? But that ends right there, really and truly. And so what are those opportunities for this sort of like in real informal education, and not just assuming like, well, they won't understand, so we probably shouldn't bother. But the onus, I think, is on us as the professionals and practitioners to make that extra effort to communicate sort of like these leaps and bounds, like the average person isn't even really aware of. And so the challenge is, how do we do that in context of everything else that we have on our plate?
You get 5 minutes.
Nikki Volga, CSR co-chair. I would also completely second what Laurel said. I think we also need to get our own house in order as chemists, engineers, and scientists, right? Because, I've heard everything from, well, should no paper be published until it's already been verified independently by an entirely separate independent lab, for example? Should we go down to the individual data point that gets verified, whether it be a synthesis, one reaction gets verified, and that's put into the literature. Sort of like the open source software movement can also very quickly figure out what works and what doesn't. And because we lose our trust when we have articles that talk about huge amounts of irreproducible results, and not, how can you trust the literature? Especially because we are, of course, not experts in every single area of science and engineering. We also have to trust the literature. If I go after some medical need as a chemist, I have to trust that was real. And so I would say we should get our own house in order first, so that we build community trust in the process of science before we start or in parallel with all the other outreach activities, because we don't have control over the larger planet, but we definitely have control about what we say is acceptable and not acceptable for how we conduct our own research.
I did just to wrap up, I did have an ongoing survey, just really informal, because I was curious about a few things. And so far, it's a really, really broad group. Most of the people who responded are not scientists, a few students. Most people think the chemical industry is just plastics and related, materials. Most people say they don't have a positive view of chemicals or the chemical industry. One of the questions was, would you want the chemical industry where you live? Right? So that was a very interesting question, because most people view the chemical industry or enterprise very, very negatively. And so that too is an opportunity. We rely on it, like we want the medicines, but we technically don't really trust it. We definitely don't trust the manufacturing, right? And some people said, yes, it can be in my community if, but the majority of people said absolutely not. Right. And when you dig into the why, then, that kind of gets fleshed out. But it's really interesting to see, when you survey the general population outside of our practicing sector, to get people's perspective on what it is we're doing, right, in labs and in the government and regulation and things like that. It's very, very different to what we think we're doing.
So yeah, I'd like to thank Laurel for playing this game with me, and especially Apoorva Dave and Aaron Carmel for kind of walking us through it. And I just kind of want to remind us something that Apoorva told us yesterday, and maybe challenge this group. He showed us nodes, and so think about the nodes. I mean, in my mind, going back to chaos theory, like that's a point where we could have the positive or a negative future. And so, and Laurel brought up earlier in this morning discussion, we have history. So it'd be great if a community like this or a group can identify what are the nodes in the future of chemistry, AI, and drug discovery. What are those nodes? How do we watch out for them, and how do we make sure we go down the right road? So thank you again, and I'll close this panel from yesterday, and then we're going to, I think we could probably have like a 5-minute break, and then we'll go into our final panel led by Marty Burke on a citizen scientist. Thank you. Erica, we good to go? Okay, let's get started. I'm going to pass the mic to Marty Burke to lead our finals panel discussion.
Thank you so much, Mike, and thank you, everybody. A great session, great readouts. It's very exciting and, of course, very stimulating. Got to look forward to the future and think about kind of what possibilities exist and how we might kind of shape getting there. That's exactly the goal of this last session. Is very exciting to think about the convergence of AI and chemistry and the possibilities that it creates. One that we've talked about a lot is it allows us to imagine a world where anyone can make medicines. That itself is a very exciting question and brings up all kinds of interesting challenges and opportunities. And it's certainly starting to look very much like a real possibility. So then we thought it'd be very important to spend some time maybe to finish off the workshop where we learn from other places and spaces where they have very successfully leveraged kind of uniquely human superpowers to accomplish extraordinary things. It's very interesting when you think about the area of medicine. There are 8 billion of us on the planet. Perhaps the one thing we can all agree on, everyone wants to be healthy. They want their families to be healthy. They want their communities to be healthy. So we have a tremendous shared passion and interest and commitment into achieving health. How amazing would it be if anyone from that 8 billion tremendous talent pool would have the capacity to help us get there? So I think it's a very exciting question. And fortunately, there are some great examples where both in drug discovery as well as outside of it, people have figured out how to tap into these universal human superpowers and achieve extraordinary things. So people call that citizen scientists. We call it democratizing innovation, democratizing discovery. There's many different ways in which it's described. But we're very fortunate today to have 3 individuals who have been pioneers in that space, where human superpowers have been tapped in a meaningful, needle-moving way to drive, major, really needle-moving impact forward. And so we wanted to invite them all to come here today, kind of just tell us their story. What can we learn from cases where this has worked? What hasn't worked? What are some of the challenges? What are the translatable aspects of those stories into the space of drug discovery? And what are the things that we should really look to avoid so that we don't necessarily maybe repeat the same mistakes along the way? Again, we're very fortunate to have people in the area of drug discovery. We also have someone who's going to tell us about how the future of coding was revolutionized and democratized, and even how anyone can actually help find exoplanets millions of light years away and really helped revolutionize the way space is explored. Okay, so with that further ado, we're going to go ahead and jump right in. Our 3 panelists, we have, who I'll introduce a bit when they go ahead and give their stories, but we have Emily Kramer-Golenkoff from Emily's Entourage, Margaret Honey from the Scratch Foundation, and Rob Zellum from the Goddard Space Flight Center and NASA. And we're going to start with Emily. So Emily Kramer-Golenkoff is the heroic co-founder of Emily's Entourage, someone who saw and was keenly aware on a personal level of a major unmet medical need and decided to do something about it, and has not only revolutionized the way the world looks for tomorrow's treatments for cystic fibrosis, but has been a tremendously inspirational role model for anyone who wants to figure out how they can contribute to finding great medicines for really important unmet medical needs. Emily, thank you so much for taking the time to join us, and we're really excited to turn the floor over to you. If you could tell us a little bit about Emily's Entourage story. You're on mute.
Thank you so much, Marty. Can you hear me now?
Perfect. Thanks so much.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much. That's a really kind introduction, and I really appreciate it. I am Emily Kramer-Golenkoff, as you heard. I'm a co-founder of Emily's Entourage, and Emily's Entourage is a 501c3 that speeds research and drug development for those in the final 10% that don't benefit from recent mutation-targeted therapies. There have been really, truly revolutionary breakthroughs in the treatment of CF, but they've been targeted at those with the most common mutations of CF. And that's about 90% of the population. And so we are really focused on the outlying 10% that doesn't benefit. And in addition to that, I'm also a person living with very advanced stage lung disease. I'm part of that outlying 10% myself, and I have about 30% lung function on my very best of days. And so this is a topic that is personal, and I actually think, to this point of citizen science and regular people being able to spur extraordinary change, desperation can be an incredibly powerful and effective motivator and change maker. And I think my story is an example of that. So back in 2011, we started Emily's Entourage because we were seeing these game-changing advances coming down the pike for 90% of the CF population. I happen to have 2 copies of what's called a nonsense mutation of cystic fibrosis, which place me in that outlying 10% that unfortunately wouldn't benefit. Having advanced stage disease, we realized that time was of the essence, and that I didn't have time for drug development to unfold on the traditional timeline. And most importantly, we also realized that there was a whole group of people in the same boat as me that desperately needed advances and for whom there really was nothing on the horizon. And so it was really that collision of opposing forces, the desperation due to my own disease progression, as well as the unprecedented hope as we were seeing these mutation-targeted therapies coming down the pike that led to the formation of Emily's Entourage. We saw a very strong need for leadership, coordination, and focus specifically on what we call the final 10%. And so despite having no background in fundraising and no background in science and no desire to start a nonprofit foundation, we were spurred by desperation. And so we dove in headfirst, and my family, friends, and I launched Emily's Entourage. And from the beginning, our mission has been singular: to bring life-saving advances to those in the final 10%, and most importantly, to do it fast, because time matters. And so I thought I could give you just a brief overview of some of our big accomplishments to date, and then talk just a little bit about what we do, and then I guess pass back to Marty. So some of our big accomplishments we've come a really long way since 2011. We've raised over $15 million. We've awarded 38 research grants to top investigators all around the world, and secured over $52.3 million in follow-on funding. We deployed a venture philanthropy model to spin out a CF gene therapy company called Spirevant that is now conducting a phase 1/2 clinical trial and recently dosed its first CF patient. We've also launched a patient database and a clinical trial matchmaking program to expedite clinical trial recruitment for this ultra-rare population, because it turns out clinical trial recruitment is one of the really big barriers for fast drug development for rare disease. And really, all of our activities are focused singularly on accelerating research and drug development for people with CF that don't benefit from these mutation-targeted therapies, the final 10%. And so really, our work spans the full spectrum of drug development, everything from research grant programs, and we award grants through a variety of different grant mechanisms, to venture philanthropy, our clinical trial recruitment efforts I mentioned, our patient database and our clinical trial matchmaking program, which are really important for speeding recruitment and enrollment for such an ultra rare population. We also host scientific conferences. We actually have a conference coming up on Sunday focused on gene therapy delivery, and we really believe in the power of convening top thought leaders, both from within the CF space and outside of the CF space. We also do regulatory and advocacy work, including working with the FDA to raise awareness of the urgent unmet needs and smooth the regulatory path for future therapies. And then, of course, there's a huge fundraising and awareness component. We have to raise the funds and the awareness to fuel the research and drug development. And as a small nonprofit, that is always a big part of what we do. And so that is a little bit about me and about Emily's entourage in a nutshell. And I'm sure we're going to delve into more on the actual panel.
Appreciate your perspective and your heroic leadership, and look forward to learning more, as you said, in the question and answer session. So our second speaker is Margaret Honey, who is the president and CEO of the Scratch Foundation. So I learned about Scratch one morning. I was having breakfast with my two kids, and at that time, my kindergartner started laughing at me because he found out I didn't know how to code. And he thought this was hilarious. And then I think he was embarrassed. And he's like, "Dad, please don't tell my friends." It was like I didn't know how to read. And I was like, "What are you talking about?" And he brought me over to the computer and actually pulled up Scratch Junior and sat there and taught me how to code by dragging little blocks of code into the computer screen and getting this character to, dance at my command. And I realized that I just learned how to code from my kindergartner. And I was so inspired. I had to learn as much as I could about the Scratch story, which really revolutionized coding and introduced block-based coding for now millions. And Margaret, we're so grateful that you took the time to share your story. And we're looking forward to learning everything we can as a community about how you guys pulled this off. The floor is yours.
Great. Thank you so much, Marty. And hi, everybody. I wish I could see you all, but this will do. Marty had to twist my arm to make me believe I had something relevant to share with this group, because it really is a lesson from a different domain. But I want to return for a minute, and I'll give a little bit of info on my own background, but I want to return to kind of where Marty began, which is because I think it's really important in anything you want to scale, anything you want to grow big. This idea of leveraging uniquely human superpowers. I think we can't underestimate the importance of that. So I'm a developmental psychologist by training, and I have spent kind of my entire career at the intersection of interactive media and R&D, making things, studying things, and really learning and exploring a lot about how what are often considered new tools kind of take root in practice and can help enhance and inform the work that teachers and young people are doing. So Scratch, as Marty said, it was created at MIT, at the MIT Media Lab, by Mitch Resnick. And Mitch's brilliance was that he really did think hard about how to design Scratch so that it would tap into young people's creative superpowers. And so his goal, despite Marty's intro, Mitch's goal was not to create a program that would, or a platform that would teach kids how to code, but he wanted to create an accessible, very low barrier to entry, but kind of high ceiling of complexity. You could, if you were a real novice, you could wrap your arms around it. But if you know more about coding, you can go on to do quite sophisticated things. He wanted to create an accessible approach to coding that would enable young people to use code as a means of creative expression. And that's really what Scratch does. So Scratch debuted in 2007, and within about a year, actually, I'm looking at a chart here. It had by about 2010, it had 1 million users. By 2021, it had surpassed 100 million users. And in 2024, all in, we have seen, at the end of 2024, we've seen nearly 150 million young people on the platform. And Scratch has done there's no marketing, no advertising. So the question becomes, why? Why has this happened? What were the catalytic kind of components that has really enabled this platform to scale and grow? We are now used by young people, and the average age of kids is 12. There is a Scratch Junior program, as Marty mentioned, for younger kids, but the kids we see on the online platform are kind of, the sweet spot is between about 9, 10, and 14, 15. So why? What has enabled Scratch to scale? I think first and foremost, Scratch is not an ed tech platform that is designed to say, I'm going to teach you X, Y, and Z. So I said before, it's really, Mitch created an accessible approach to coding so that kids could use code as a means for their ideas, their creations, their projects, things that they are passionate about. And I think the importance of that, as we learn from and really listen to our users all around the world, is that they deeply value that. Scratch is for me. You hear that all the time. Scratch is mine, space to make where my creativity can take root. That's one thing. The other thing Mitch did is he created an online community, which has grown vastly, to enable kids to really learn and share ideas with one another. So one of the things they can do is comment on one another's projects. They can borrow one another's code, and they can set up, we call them studios. They're kind of like thematic discussion forums where kids can contribute projects on a particular theme or topic and talk about them. And that global community is wildly popular as well, because kids are in a position of really being able to learn from other kids. So I think I often say centering young people's agency, centering their creativity, their ideas, not telling them what they have to know, but giving them a platform where they can kind of explore and tinker and mess about and figure out what they need to know in order to be able to create what they want to make is really important. So centering kids' agency and curiosity. The second thing is Scratch has been open source from the get-go. And that has really spawned a much broader universe of products that have taken and incorporated Scratch code and are using them in robotics kits, in coding him, in all different kinds of things, like literally, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, well, actually thousands and thousands and thousands of both companies, nonprofit organizations, schools, libraries, community-based groups use Scratch in one way or another. And many of those have taken and used the code, the Scratch code in their own projects. The third reason why I think Scratch has scaled really goes to the educational kind of policy context. So we see in our data a beginning spike during the Obama years when the Obama administration called it CS for All, computer science for all, became a thing. And a number of organizations also grew up around that, really advocating for the importance of computer science in education more broadly in young people's lives. That catalyzed a lot of growth. These days, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, which oversees the PISA program of assessment. PISA stands for the Program in International Student Assessment. So it's primarily focused on 15-year-olds. And I think these days there are 102 countries around the world that participate in the PISA program and use a range of different kinds of assessments. This year, they are debuting an assessment called Learning in the Digital World. Not about technology, really fundamentally not about technology, but about using technology as a tool to express your knowledge and to problem solve. Probably very much like many of you use technologies routinely in your own work. We all do. And so that assessment is going to hit the ground this year. And we are now beginning to see in our data these sort of outlier situations pop up. So in November, we saw Saudi Arabia go from about 6,000 monthly users to 60,000. We saw a similar, smaller country trend in Jordan and a number of other countries as well. The reason why Scratch is relevant to the PISA Learning in the Digital World assessment is really twofold. One, the assessment anchors a lot of the tasks that kids have to do in block-based coding. And two, as I said before, the assessment really leans into using technology as a tool to represent your ideas, your thinking, and your problem solving. And that is very much what Scratch enables young people to do. So those, in my opinion, those factors have been really catalytic and are continuing to be catalytic in our growth. And we are on track to reach or exceed 200 million users by 2027. So not far from now. And just to give you a sense of the scale of what kids produce. So that 100 million Scratch users back in 2021, they created, and these live on the platform, over 1 billion projects. So the activity, use, engagement is tremendous and enormous. So Marty also asked us to speak to kind of some of the challenges. And I think, one of the challenges is when, Mitch created this in his lab at MIT. Nobody thought it was going to get wildly successful. He had a good friend and an MIT board member who's still on the board of the Scratch Foundation, a man named David Siegel, who really encouraged him to think about giving Scratch a life beyond his laboratory. So we did create the Scratch Foundation and set that up. But as you can imagine, with the amount of dramatic growth we've been seeing, costs keep escalating. So we're like Emily's organization, we're a 501c3. We rely at this moment in time heavily exclusively on philanthropic dollars and support. And we are trying to figure out ways that are mission aligned to take advantage, not so much of young people, because we have a commitment to not advertising to young people. That's not Scratch's model, but to parents, potentially to schools, to groups of individuals who could benefit from kind of enhanced opportunities to access resources that they would value. So I think, if I were to say, what's the biggest challenge with Scratch, that in our case, in the case of sort of running and figuring out how to support and sustain a technology platform, the scale is extraordinary and it opens lots of doors and lots of conversations for us. There's no doubt about it. But it's also something that I think is really important to manage toward and through, because whatever you're scaling is going to demand and require more resources. Yes, it can absolutely have transformative impact, but you have to figure out how to keep it going. And I would imagine, Emily, in your work, that's something you think about a lot as well. So I'm going to stop there and turn it back to Marty.
Margaret, thank you so much. That was awesome. And last and certainly not least, we have Rob Zellum here with us from the NASA Goddard Space Program and this Flight Center. So at NASA, they dared to imagine that citizen scientists could help us discover exoplanets millions of light years away, and it worked. And I've always been tremendously inspired by this story. And every time we have conversations where we start talking about the future of chemistry and what might be possible, I remember thinking to myself when I learned about the NASA Planet Hunters program, if citizen scientists can help find exoplanets millions of light years away, don't tell me that citizen scientists can't help us discover tomorrow's medicines. And I think we're really excited, Rob, that you can be here to tell us a little bit about the story. How did you pull this off, and what does the future look like for citizen scientists, planet hunters?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, folks. Really honored to be here. I'm Rob Zellum. I'm at NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center. I'm an astronomer, and my science background is that I use absorption and emission spectroscopy to analyze the atmospheres of exoplanets. It's so great I don't have to explain what that means, that you'll understand that it is. So that's great. Thank you. Great audience here. And I really wear two hats mostly at Goddard. One, I'm the Deputy Project Scientist for Communications for Nancy Grace Roman Space Telescope. That's NASA's next astrophysics flagship mission. We're on schedule. We're on budget. Right now, we're aiming towards an October of 2026 launch, and we're launching no later than May of 2027. This is, again, NASA's next astrophysics flagship mission. It's mostly in the visible and the infrared, and it can do Hubble quality science 1,000 times faster. So in Roman's first year of life, it'll do what will take Hubble 1,000 years to do, which is pretty incredible. Roman will be doing some surveys, and these surveys are really 80% of its time are dominated by these core community surveys that are actually defined by the entire larger astrophysical community. This is very different from how Hubble and James Webb are run, where you have proposals that are written and you have them vying for time or proposing for time on specific telescopes. So it's a very cool paradigm shift where this space telescope is now largely being driven by a large national and international community of astronomers directing the time. But in one of the surveys, we'll be looking at billions of stars. And in that survey of these billions of stars, we're hoping to discover tens, if not hundreds, of thousands of exoplanets. Planets altering the light of their host star or a background star that they gravitationally microlens. And the amount of data that will be generated by Roman is 1 terabyte of data a day. 1 gaming PC's worth of data a day. It's a lot of Minecrafts, folks. And the great thing about this is that that's a ton of data. Each image by itself will be 0.5 gigabyte big. So we'll be running everything in the cloud. And yes, we'll be using machine learning and AI to analyze the imagery, but it's not perfect. As we learned through Planet Hunters Tests, which is a citizen science project that's analyzing data from NASA's TESS mission, which is discovering tens of thousands of new exoplanets, it does leverage machine learning and AI, but the algorithms aren't perfect. They miss things. And really, humans, at the end of the day, we're really great about picking out patterns and looking for things that can confound the computers. So actually, citizen scientists have actually helped us discover tens of new exoplanets that the pipeline has missed. And we'll be leveraging these same citizen scientists to look at Roman data to then help us characterize, or really to discover new planets that the pipelines have also missed for all the Roman data. And it's even more imperative that we have these folks, in my own personal view, in this entire process because of the ton of data that will be generated. Again, 1 terabyte of data a day. The other hat I wear is I'm the project scientist and lead for a citizen science project called Exoplanet Watch. So what we're leveraging is amateur astronomers and folks across the entire globe that are helping us observe transiting exoplanets when a planet passes in front of its star, blocks out and absorbs some of its star's light, causing the absorption spectroscopy to occur, so we can analyze these exoplanetary atmospheres. They're helping us better determine the timing of when these events will occur. And the reason we have to know very accurately of when these transit events occur is because we want to use large observatories like the James Webb Space Telescope, like Keck or Gemini, and in these large ground-based telescopes to look at these transit events to characterize these atmospheres. And sometimes there might be a 5-minute uncertainty, a 15-minute uncertainty of when that next transit occurs. Typically, it's not a big deal. We'll just build in that overhead. But missions like James Webb, they want to look at hundreds of exoplanets. There's a future mission being launched by ESA, the European Space Agency, that'll be observing 1,000 exoplanets. And if you tally up the cumulative time wasted on some of these efforts, it's days, if not hundreds or thousands of days. And just a few hours, 3 hours of time on James Webb is worth $100,000. And everyone rightly wants to use these very large platforms to do compelling science. So it's really our obligation, if you want to call it that, to use these resources as efficiently as possible to maximize their science output. So I was sort of looking at this problem of, good Lord, we're going to be wasting all this time and eventually also taxpayer money. What can we do? And at the same time, I was giving talks about, being an exoplanet astronomer. I have amateur astronomers coming up to me at the end saying, hey, how do I get involved? And that sort of triggered that idea in my brain is there's lots of amateur astronomers out here that are able to do really incredible science, better than I can, and I essentially went to grad school for it, right? They're a lot better than I am at some of the astrophotography and data collection. We could leverage these folks across the globe to help us make these observations. And we found that even a small 6-inch telescope, we have one robotic telescope out in Tucson, Arizona. It was designed in the late 80s and early 90s. And for the last 13 years, it's observing these transiting exoplanets. The data quality is incredible, like a multi-sigma detection result of the transit depth as well. It's absolutely incredible. That even a 6-inch telescope can observe hundreds of planets throughout a year and can save cumulatively hundreds of hours, if not days, of time on these larger platforms. To an amateur astronomer, a 6-inch telescope is sometimes pretty small scope sizes. We have amateurs now that have, half-meter telescopes, 2 to 3 times larger than our 6-inch telescope. And now today, through Exoplanet Watch, we have over 3,000 people worldwide. We have hundreds of amateur astronomers with their own telescopes, but we have many thousands more who don't. And they're helping us analyze that data from the microobservatory, that 6-inch telescope robotically controlled out of Tucson, Arizona. And we're enabling anyone and everyone truly to participate in this program. And you actually use data code that I use professionally as an astronomer myself. The only thing that's different is it's run on the Google Colab Cloud. And you could run it on your smartphone. I've done it on my own iPhone before, so you don't even need a Mac or anything nice to run the code on at all. You can check out data directly from us. And we've cumulatively saved over 4 to 5 hours of James Webb time alone so far in just like 2 or 3 papers we published, saving $100,000, if not more, of James Webb time. So if NASA's listening, you can cut me a check for $100K. That'd be great. I'll take half of it. That's okay. And what's really, really incredible is now educational groups, high school teachers, college professors are using Exoplanet Watch as part of their curricula. So we've actually had some high school students that have even written their own first author peer-reviewed papers and are now leveraged that to get into undergrad and are now pursuing astronomy in undergrad. We have this amazing partnership with Arizona State University. Dr. Molly Simon, she's designed this online astronomy degree class that leverages Exoplanet Watch. And we have a few interns that are non-traditional students. We have one, for example, that was told that he wasn't smart enough to be an astronomer. So he lived his entire life, and then when he retired, he's like, you know what, I'll try this, and I'll try to become an astronomer. And now he's going back to get his undergrad degree in astro and is writing first author publications and is a major contributing co-author. We have other students that are currently like in the military that are doing this part-time. They're writing their own first author publications, and they're now wanting to go back later in life to now pursuing it in graduate school. So it's really rewarding in that sense for me personally, because, I'm sure like all of you working at your computer all day, it's very easy to get burned out and forget what we do is really cool. And this is sometimes that sort of ray of light that I need in my life to remind me, what we're doing is compelling and important. And it's such a joy to work with all of these folks on a daily basis and just to interact with them. I'm very, very truly lucky to do what I do. So thank you for having me.
Awesome, Rob. Thank you so much. All right, so we can now move into our question and answer session with the panel. I was going to start things off. We mentioned at the beginning, and you really nicely amplified this, Margaret, the concept that are uniquely human superpowers. In order for citizen science to work, meaning to really make meaningful change, right? Not just try to set up a program that kind of looks really nice and hits all the marks, but doesn't actually end up moving the needle. It seems like all three of you have tapped into some aspect of kind of a unique human superpower that's remarkably universal. You know, Amy, there's so many different ways we can think about this. So Emily, you talked about desperation. In some ways, that is a unique human superpower, the capacity to feel so strongly that everything depends on finding the answer to this question. Margaret, you talked about the kind of hunger for creative agency as almost a common thread in what makes us human, and kids are just flowing with this hunger for that. And, you know, Rob, you really mentioned a very specific one. You know, millions of years of evolution led to this remarkable capacity for pattern recognition. And the tapping into that actually outpaces what computers can even currently still do. So if we asked you now, okay, so we as a field, we're trying to imagine, what do, you know, citizen medicinal chemists do? Can you give us your perspective? Can you think of some uniquely human superpowers that you would imagine may be worth figuring out how to tap into to help us find tomorrow's medicines? Emily, I'll start with you since you're the closest to this space, and then we'll branch out from there.
Thank you. Well, first of all, it's been so interesting to hear these different perspectives. So thank you so much for pulling together this panel, and I feel honored to be part of it. And I do love this theme of uniquely human superpowers. I mean, I think that's been one of the incredible findings for me, is just realizing our need, you know, regular people, how like the spaces where we are uniquely capable of driving change, and also how in some spaces, like in some cases, you know, I think it's kind of easy to think that major institutions have things all figured out, and it is at once both heartbreaking and terrifying, but then also incredibly empowering to realize that they don't. And sometimes your voice and your story and your ability to mobilize communities and change is the thing that the world needs. And I think that just, like, for me, that was just such a crazy thing to find. And so, and I guess like the other, you know, I think desperation, for one, certainly is a unique human superpower that can drive unbelievable change and can make it happen fast and can move mountains. And, you know, we've seen that through all of history. And, but I think the other really huge one that I have experienced is, and I don't mean this to sound cheesy, but is just like human connection, and how powerful that can be. I mean, for me, one of the most moving things in this whole experience has been getting to meet researchers, you know, academic researchers at companies, and the people at the front lines of drug development. And while cystic fibrosis has, you know, always felt like, you know, my disease and my problem and my, you know, this is my lived experience and my life, realizing that it was theirs too, and how deeply personal it is to people. You know, and I didn't get the choice about living with CF, but those folks did, and they choose to devote their time and their talent and their brilliance and their energy to this space. And that is just an incredibly heroic choice to make. And so I think, and being able to connect deeply with those people on the front lines, and realizing how personal and connecting so deeply, and being able to share our stories and share my story and make this personal to them. I think that the power of relationships and connections and the accessibility of people's hearts, and realizing that scientists and sometimes even companies have big, accessible hearts. And I think that is an unbelievably unique and powerful human superpower. And And I think at the end of the day, that is what makes change is people who care and people who connect and people who dream of better futures and are driven to create them no matter how big the hurdles are along the way. And so I think that is really the biggest thing for me is just that human connection and relationships and heart.
Thank you so much. Margaret, same question to you.
Yeah, I very much agree with Emily's leaning into connection, heart, all of that. Absolutely. I think also when you were asking the question, Marty, I met a couple months ago, a really interesting guy, Mike Wishart is his name, who created a company called eFabulous. And what they are working on, it's going to sound like a completely different subject, but it's not, is how do you make the capacity to create specialized chips accessible to everyone? And the reason why that's important, Emily, it's a lot like your work, right? The whole name of the game, not just your work, but drug discovery more broadly. I mean, so much, this is an outsider peering in, but so much of what I see, kind of in the sort of world of big pharma and all of that is, it's what can you take to scale to mass market to generate revenue quickly and effectively, right? And it's often the more bespoke and niche opportunities that get sidelined in that process. And so that underlying kind of thought of, wow, what could be if we could make chips that are tailored to solving specific problems. And somebody else said to me, Margaret, the future of AI isn't out there, it's in chips. And he's probably exactly right. But what would happen? So this company, and the founder of it, in a very focused, laser-like way, was crystal clear about the problem he was trying to solve for. In the chip world, the barrier to entry is way too high for most people because that world, probably not unlike the world of drug discovery, is really driven by a desire to get to scale as quickly and efficiently and effectively as you can. More is always better. It's not so much about solving problems as it is about capturing a market, a very, very large market. And so I think that the additional piece I would add to what Emily was saying is, like, you really have to be thoughtful and intentional and passionate about the problem you are trying to solve for. And back to Mitch and Scratch for a minute, I think Mitch has always been, in his work, someone who believes that learning is driven much more effectively, and now there's tons of evidence about this, but much more effectively when we have agency in that process. Right? When you get to make and create and think through the problems you're trying to solve, rather than just answer rote questions on worksheets and those kinds of things, which sadly go on a lot in our school. And I think since I've been in, which hasn't been that long, it's been about a year, in this role at the Scratch Foundation, I often talk about how, like, the non-negotiable for us is in everything we do. We have to center that. We have to center kids' creativity and their agency. Like, that is a problem space that we want to be responsive to. So I would just add that whole sort of piece of, like, problem space, or what are you trying to, what are you really trying to solve for to what Emily was talking about. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Margaret. All right, Rob, same question to you. So what are kind of unique human superpowers that from your space you say I could see might actually be useful in the area of drug discovery?
Emily honestly said it better than I could have ever. It's that sense of community. And I'm very fortunate that in our Excellent Watch community that we have many tens, if not hundreds of folks that are more than willing to help out other folks to get onboarded immediately. So we have this channel on our Slack, for example, that people introduce themselves and immediately someone else will jump in and say welcome and then give them immediately the link to how to get quickly started into the project. And that's something we really aim for since day one. Before I even launched the project, I did a lot of fact finding from other citizen science projects, learning where they succeeded and where they failed or where they struggled. And honestly, the best lessons I've ever learned were seeing how other people failed or other people have struggled and try to think of a solution on how to fix that. So that was really what made us want to establish this very strong community of our users and to make sure that they help each other out. I have the Slack channel on my own personal phone. I get it all the time, all the day. And I try to always pause a few minutes myself from even answering questions to allow our citizen scientists, our other helpers, our watchers to help each other out and to jump in instead and answer a question. And that just fosters that sort of sense of, yes, you have an equal part of this project. It's as much of your project as it is mine. And I make sure to repeat that as well so they know that. And then they're able to help each other out and feel empowered to help each other out. And as a result, they have actually built this really amazingly tight-knit community. And I had some friendships with some of these folks across the US and across the world. It's incredible. And other people have all started their own research collaborations. So really, as Emily quite awesomely put it, it's about establishing the sense of community, making people connected to then help prop each other up to then achieve that science, to achieve the goals of the Citizen Science Project.
One more from me, and then I'm looking forward to some questions from the audience. So we've heard so much about what you or your foundation or group have done well and what has worked. Also very curious to hear what missteps, what mistakes. Another way to ask the question, what would you go back and tell your fire starter self or the kind of things that percolate in the company of these are the lessons we learned. Let's say if our field does want to try to achieve this citizen medicinal chemist vision, what would you advise us not to do to make sure we don't have to relearn your well-earned history? Emily, we're back to you to start.
So what not to do? That's an interesting question. I mean, I think a lot of our lessons have just been like things that maybe I wish I knew earlier rather than sort of total missteps where I think we went the wrong way. And so maybe if it's okay, I can talk a little bit about some of those, like the things that I think are the most important and that I wish I knew more about earlier on. Well, first, and I guess this is sort of building on what I said before, and I think we actually did know this from the start, but if I was talking to a new group, one of the first things that I would tell them is first of all, not to assume that everything is being handled like as you think it should be, that it is up to you to articulate the needs and the opportunities and to check and to explore that yourself and not make assumptions. And then also about the power of putting faces and stories to unmet needs. We've seen firsthand the power that has to make changes. I mean, we've seen companies make big decisions based on some of, the relationships and conversations that we have had. And so I really do think that leading with humanity and human stories and human need and connection is always, people will say they want statistics and they will say they want all sorts of things, but at the end of the day, I do think it is often emotions that compel the greatest change. And so I really do think there's power in connecting people and stories and faces to needs. I also think a big power, I mean, this is sort of specific to patient-led advocacy organizations. But one thing that I have found is that we have a really unique convening power. And I think the fact that a lot of times there are a lot of different stakeholders that have a lot of different agendas, and the fact that we represent the the well-being of the patient community kind of gives us, a little bit of a moral authority in a sense, that we really rest on heavily, which is that we don't care how we get to the solutions. I mean, we want to get there safely and ethically and all those things, but we don't care which direction it takes to get there. We don't care which therapeutic approach. We don't care which company. We don't care. None of that matters to us. All that matters is that patients get the breakthroughs that they need and that they get them as quickly as possible and as painlessly as possible. And so I think one big lesson has just been our ability to leverage our unique convening power. And, there have been a few examples of that through the Emily's Entourage history. I also think one other big sort of lesson learned is, has been really, there are a million things that need to be done. And as a small organization, one of the biggest challenges is always going to be prioritizing energy and resources and funding. And so really honing in on the major pain points and the things that are going to be the biggest levers of success is extremely vital to do from as early as you have sufficient data to do it. And so for us, we realized early on, or not as early as I wish, but we did realize, around clinical trial recruitment, and that wasn't really what we initially intended to do or imagined doing, but we realized that was such an enormous pain point in drug development. And that was also an area where we felt like we could add value. So I do think really, even if it means stretch, always keeping your eyes on your goals and your mission, but sometimes you take some different twists and turns that you don't really expect, or you find that there are, we thought we were just going to be funding research, and then we realized that there was this huge issue with clinical trial recruitment. So it took us in a little bit different direction, but it was a critical, it's a critical area for us to address to reach our ultimate goal. And then, I think also a final lesson learned, and we're still trying to learn this lesson, is thinking ahead and about what's around the corner. And, for us, working with regulatory agencies before you even necessarily need their collaboration, but that, building those relationships really early on, and just sort of anticipating the relationships and the needs and the resources that you're going to need far in advance, and getting those queued up so that doesn't become another thing that you have to wait for when, what you're focused on is speed. And so that is something that we are always focusing on and working on. But I think for us, those were some of the really big ones.
That's great. Thanks so much.
Are you asking me, Marty?
Yes, that would be great.
Yeah, sorry, the internet was a little funny there. So in Scratch's case, as I mentioned before, Scratch was developed in Mitch's lab. And I think I've known Mitch for many years. We met back in grad school days, so a long time ago. And when he was thinking about rolling Scratch out, he asked me to get, in building a 501c3, he asked me to get involved on the board. So I was on the board for about 10 years before, maybe not quite 10 years, but a chunk of time before assuming this role. And Scratch almost didn't make it. It almost didn't make it. And I've thought so much about, we all try to learn from our mistakes, right? So what did we as a board do wrong? What could we have done to help much more effectively help this succeed. And I think, I think we did a very typical thing. Okay, Scratch needs a life beyond the Media Lab. We're going to set up a 501(c)(3. We're going to find somebody to run it, and poof. And like in hindsight, that just was not enough. And I think the people who were doing this work, didn't think carefully and reflectively enough about what is really required, what is really needed. So one, you need somebody who gets, the ultimate superpower that the product has been created to address, right? Just extending that metaphor. I think too, and nonprofit boards, in my experience, they're tremendously varied. Some can be quite directive and some really at a distance. Yeah, kind of whatever. But I think we should have been much more assertive about some of the obvious things that needed to happen. By the time Scratch actually left the Media Lab, which was 2019, so it was 12 years old. That's old in tech terms. And we knew that the back end needed re-engineering, upgrading, all of that. And we kind of, made that suggestion, but no action. And I think I've thought a lot about that, because I think like maybe we should have been much more directive. But then in thinking about how to answer this question, I was thinking, like, is there a different model where you don't try to go from, like I think the thing about a well-functioning university-based lab is it's a lot like Emily and Mark, the kinds of things you've been talking about. It's like-minded people who are coming together, working really closely. It's a community. It's really, right? And to take all of that and put it in a very different context is kind of harsh. So I wonder, I don't know what it would be, but I wonder if you couldn't evolve a different kind of transitional model that continued to have the founder, the Mitch person, really intimately involved in helping to set direction and helping everybody really understand like the values that went into creating this thing and why they're so important to its success. While, organizational infrastructure is being built out and established. And I don't know, but our experience was it was very, very complicated. And Scratch almost didn't make it. But we course corrected, which is good, and things are moving in the right direction. So, but we still, in terms of making sure, what's most important about Scratch is the kind of learning it embodies, right? So it's not the current tech platform, but how do we continue to evolve with technology tools and new technologies? We're doing this now with AI in really interesting ways. Approaches to engagement that continue to center children's agency. And I feel like you need that, you always need that kind of North Star perspective. I think we've been talking about a lot, talking about that idea a lot this afternoon. But I think that's really important.
And Marty, can I just say one quick reaction to what Margaret said?
Yeah.
Because I think the point about course correction is so critical, because I guess as a small startup, like, you're going to make 1 million mistakes all the time. You're rarely going to get it right on the first try. And that's not really the point either. I mean, I think the point is to ultimately get in the right direction as quickly and efficiently as possible. And so it is all about the course correction, and just being able to pivot, learn fast, learn well and pivot quickly. I think that is just a really important point. And so just wanted to echo that.
Yeah. Thanks, Emily.
Okay, Rob, so what were the lessons that emerged from Planet Hunters that we might be able to get a head start? Because you're going to share them with us.
Yeah, so basically what the other two have also said is that Exoplanet Watch, before we launched, we spent many years in development. And me being the scientist type A person that I wanted to be to fix everything immediately, wanted to rush it out and announce it to the world. I was very lucky to have a friend and mentor, colleague, Anya Paferno, who is a communications expert at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. And she really urged me, really told me to pump the brakes and to take my time and to develop it. So therefore, we sort of had like a very small, reduced rollout of the project where we got tens of hundreds of folks across the world to sort of step through the process and give us their very detailed feedback. And through that process, we were able to improve our UX experience, our user experience at the end of the day. So for example, one great example is that they were literally using the same exact data analysis code that I was using as an astronomer, and we were having them install it through Terminal, through Python, install the Python sub packages. I see people shaking their heads, saying that's a bad idea. I thought it was a great idea at the time, until I had to answer questions about this code every single day, if not hourly. And that became a huge pain point. We were very fortunate, though, to also have a high school educator who had some amazingly motivated students, and they quickly figured out a way to have our code run on the Google Colab Cloud. And that just fixed everything, because people can then start hitting a play button to launch the code and run it on a remote server and not have to install anything locally. And that also made it incredibly more accessible for folks, because they could run it not on their own computer that needed Python, or you had to download some special thing for Windows to make it work. You could run your computer or your Chromebook, you could run it on your cell phone. And we really leaned heavily into that really quickly, and we were able to basically make this nicer front end, much improved UX experience, to then make it a lot easier for folks to then interact with the code. The code is exactly the same in the back end, but the way they interact with it is so much more improved at the end of the day. And as soon as we launched that, I went from answering questions literally every day, if not every hour, about this code and getting it to work. Now it's hardly ever. It's so great. We might get the same questions of like, oh, your internet just screwed up, just restart your computer, stuff like that. That's bound to happen, but it really improved things significantly. And I think we had 3 or 4 years of this, of really trialing out the program with a small user group and getting their feedback, and actually having even formal surveys for folks to give us their feedback. And sometimes it's really easy to dismiss the opinions or the input of others, because we might think, oh, we're scientists, we know the best thing, right? But I always made sure to check that sort of feeling of myself, to be like, no, these are your core folks that you're trying to reach out to. It's important to really properly address and take the comments and feedback of all your users. And I also made sure to sort of put myself at the that's good Lord, the equal playing field. Sorry, it's Friday, folks. My brain is already on vacation for the weekend. To put myself on equal footing from folks, not to act like, oh, I'm the all-powerful scientist here making all decisions. I really try to make sure I come across as a person on our Slack channel, and then to really hear as much as possible the input of folks. And honestly, by getting that feedback from our community, they have made this project so much better. They have ideas for adding features to the project that make it so much more user-friendly, that improves it so much more. And as a result, that just feeds into the success of our project and keeps us going. Have been dealing with a lot of stuff on the workload on my end for the last month or two, and I had to kind of step away from the project a bit. But luckily, thanks to all of this, the project is kind of self-sustaining, and I'm able to take a step away. We had, one person leave the project, another person unfortunately got laid off, and we had that huge reduction in our workforce and our small team, and yet the project still marches along because of our user base and our amazing community.
Okay, thanks so much to all 3 of you. I feel like we just got a huge head start, team, and we can, at least when we make the same mistakes, we'll understand that we could correct them. So why don't we go ahead to some audience questions, and we're going to start online because we may have some really good ones coming through. Mike, go ahead.
Thanks, Marty. I think this first question is kind of about how would you encourage people to do what you do? And the question is, with AI coming in the lives of human beings, how do we use our superpowers as humans to help create work, activities, and tasks for people to do, and to help gain personalized meaning in their lives? It's a kind of a heavy question for a Friday afternoon.
That is an awesome question. Okay, so the fun part now is I can allow the three of you just to decide who wants to take a first step.
So I can jump in and just say a little bit about how we're trying to do that in the context of the Scratch platform, the learning paradigm that we're working with, which is, as I've been saying, it's one that is designed to center kids' agency, their creativity, their ideas. So in thinking about how to embed AI in ways that can be kind of a catalyst for kids' creativity, kids' imaginations, all of that. The team at Scratch, really thoughtful group of people, have come up with this idea of a kind of creative learning assistant. And I think one of the most important things about that assistant is it's not all knowing, right? It's not designed to give you solutions. It's designed to be a thought partner that you work with. And you can kind of tweak and decide on the nature of the thought partnership you want to have. Do you want it to be playful? Do you want it to be creative? Do you want it to be more didactic? So, and the reason why that popped into my head is whoever asked that question, wonderful question. I think the thing we have to figure out how to hang on to is this question of where does human agency sit in relation to the work we're doing with AI? Because if we see what we've seen a lot of historically in the ed tech sector, that we're going to build a solution that's going to remedy the kids' deficits, which is how a lot of ed tech is structured. One, it doesn't work well. It's not enduring, and it's certainly not compelling. About 40% of kids who use Scratch discover it in schools. Of those kids who learn about it in school, 60% go on to make accounts at home and use it themselves. And I'm not sure there's another kind of tech product in schools that can make that kind of claim. Except Google or, something. So I think this, AI is a tool, right? And it already is in many ways augmenting, helping, enhancing our abilities, right? But it's not meant to be something that replaces particularly what we've been talking about in this conversation, which is, work that is really groundbreaking, work that's innovative, work that relies on human ingenuity and imagination. So I think how it becomes incorporated into what it is we are doing is really, really important. Because if we grow a generation of young people who come work for you all in your universities and labs and all of that, who think that all they have to do is talk to a machine to get an answer, that's a problem, right? So we have to really think about the use cases for learning to work with AI, particularly for younger people, because it will shape how they think. And I'll give you one other example. So TikTok, right? One of my colleagues was saying, because we were talking about this idea of agency, and we don't lean into in the Scratch community using algorithms to give you more of what you like, right? But there are lots of challenges around how do you make discoverability possible? How do you open up the vista for young people, right? And her niece was visiting, and she said to her aunt, my colleague, she said, "You know what I love about TikTok is it knows exactly what I want." That's a problem, right? And it's a problem that you can sort of see how that same kind of problem can map into the universe of AI. If it does all your thinking for you. Same idea. Anyway, it's a great question.
Thanks, Mark. Okay, so Rob or Emily, do you want to chime in?
Yeah, I'll jump in really quickly. So one of the things I guess I'm most proud about on Exoplanet Watch, or anything that I've been able to really work on, is sort of disrupting the ideas here, or previously held notions, right? So there is this sort of elitism thought or view that, you know, small telescopes couldn't really contribute that much to exoplanet science or astronomy in general. And we were able to show that scopes even as small as 2.5 inches, even from very light polluted areas like Los Angeles, DC, I hear it's clear out here occasionally, that's the rumor at least, you can do impactful science with these small telescopes. And sure, AI, as previous speakers have said, will be this invaluable tool that we'll be using in machine learning processes as well. And we do leverage them today. But we also think, or at least I try to think of other ways that there's sort of those gaps where humans could sort of fill in that need, for example, right? So for example, for our project, you know, we could have machine learning or AI processes run the data reduction. We could automate the data reduction in our project completely. That would require a ton of processing time and computing time. So effectively, these citizen scientists are saving us money, right? Because we don't have to reprocess the data every single time on our servers. So they've saved me, or at least the project, and NASA as a whole, you know, thousands of dollars on server costs and power. What they've also done for us is that, you know, by making them sort of do that data reduction that a computer can do, it also helps foster that sort of sense of them being a scientist themselves, or learning how science is done. It's really taken us scientists off that pedestal of, you know, being this unreachable, unattainable thing, and humanized us as a community. I think it's a very, very valuable thing as well, because we have, again, high schoolers, retirees, military folks who are able to do the same thing that I do as a professional astronomer and make their way into papers and make it available for anyone to participate in. But at the end of the day, there's also things that AI and machine learning simply cannot do, like taking your telescope and physically bringing it out into your backyard and taking photos of the sky, or then transferring that data. There will always be that need for humans in the loop. And I really tried to automate this entire project as much as humanly possible. That at the end of the day, what we're finding is that while we might get these results, we need a human in the loop to verify the results, to pick over the data, and to publish the paper, to get it published out there and out into the scientific community.
Awesome. Okay. Thanks again to all three of you. And now we'll open up questions to, oh, actually, did Emily have something she wanted? Emily, did you want to chime in, or no, you're good?
I'm okay.
Great. Okay. We have another one from online, which is awesome.
Yeah,
Right, go
and to Rob's last point, I encourage you to maybe put a telescope on a Roomba. So that might be really cool.
And I
so
do
this
have a question. Is
from-
it possible for us, for those of us online, just to share the questions that are coming in online just in the chat as well? I don't know if the organizers can do that.
Yes.
Yes.
Kay is saying yes. from the
Okay,
back of the
that's
room.
out of my
Thank you, Kay.
control.
Okay, Mike, go ahead.
This is from John Birch, and I just want to call it John Birch because I think he's across the ocean and he's been watching us this entire workshop. So thank you for staying up late. And this kind of ties together sort of themes that we heard from Margaret and Emily, and themes, but a little bit like, again, a bit thought-provoking. Are there lessons here in how we might nurture health literacy in young children, enabling them for health service agency throughout their lives? It goes on as a suggestion, perhaps letting them grow up with a digital twin. So I think it's kind of a thought-provoking and a technology question that he has thrown at us. So thank you, John.
I have a feeling Margaret will have more to say on this than I do, so I can just start by saying just a little bit, which is that, you know, the piece of this that I think I can comment on is just as a little kid growing up with a lot of health responsibilities and a lot of daily health tasks, the things that I think my parents did well, that taught me, you know, I'm at a place, you know, it hasn't always been this way, but now I'm at a place in my disease progression where, you know, I spend 4 to 5 hours a day doing medical treatments. I'm incredibly disciplined about those. And I think a lot of how I was raised, you know, taught me how, you know, how to have the discipline, and the mindset really to adhere to such an incredibly, you know, to maintain this like incredibly burdensome treatment load. And so, and that is really that, you know, when I was little, my parents, and of course, my experience having CF is not going to be, you know, thank goodness, is not the experience of most kids. But I guess I'm just sort of a super user, and there are maybe some of these principles that can trickle down for just general health literacy among kids, which is that, so, you know, when I was little, my parents made it a top priority to integrate CF into my life and to not have it be like something that was hidden or like shoved in a corner, and that they wanted me to live like a very normal life as well. But throughout that, you know, doing my treatments, you know, there are hours of airway clearance and inhaled medications and pills. Those were always sort of like non-negotiables. But also I was never taught to think of them as like terrible, shameful things. So like my parents used to do chest PT where they would, you know, pound on my chest twice a day. And, you know, to me, those were like special bonding times with my parents. And, you know, I didn't really think of them as like terrible, unpleasant, you know, I didn't think of health activities as necessarily being terrible. It was just kind of like brushing your hair, and it was non-negotiable. So it was like, you know, you couldn't ever skip it, just like you would never skip, you know, brushing your teeth or brushing your hair each day. And I just didn't really question it because it was just such it was such a regular part of our daily life. And my parents did it with me. You know, they didn't treat it like a burden. And I was joined in it in a lot of the things. And so I don't know, I think they really nurtured a very healthy relationship with what was like still like a very significant treatment burden. And also I think they really taught me that like you don't, you know, no matter how tired you are, no matter how busy you are, no matter how like bored you are, there are no exceptions. So like I never missed a treatment ever. And you know, the things that you're taught and that your parents model to you and that you think of as normal as a kid stay with you. And so that, you know, even as the treatment burden got much bigger and even as the responsibilities transitioned to me as opposed to my parents, I maintained those same principles and the same commitment to vigilance in my healthcare. And so, so I guess I'll just say that I think that making health promoting behaviors, like framing them as not a bad thing, but just a thing that you have to do, and modeling, you know, uncompromising discipline, and it is really powerful. I think that lasts with kids, and I think that there is a big opportunity for a parent to do that, especially when the treatment burdens are not nearly as significant as what I had.
Thanks so much, Emily. Margaret, did you have some thoughts in this space?
Just really quickly, Emily, that's such a powerful story. And it so illustrates the importance of what you were saying about human connection. And I think also, like what I've been saying about the importance of human agency, right, in that process. And where my brain went with that question was to Lady Bird Johnson's anti-litter campaign. Because I was a kid, I can't quite remember how old I was, but I cannot drop anything ever on the ground because of that. It was such a powerful such a powerful messaging campaign. And it just makes me reflect a lot on a very different world that young people are growing up in today, where, you know, anybody can say anything about whatever they want and claim it's true. And anyway, we could go on about that, but it's that kind of parental, not that this should fall on parents, whether it's parental attunement or public service announcement messaging that is, you know, anchored in a real responsible goal, like don't mess up our world kind of thing. Like it's harder to come by, I think, in this day and age, particularly with young kids, you know, sort of climbing onto social media, often when they're too young to be able to, their world should not be driven by algorithms that are deciding they should just get more of what they seem to like, because all it does is make us smaller as humans, not more expansive. So I mean, there's a lot to think about there. And the idea of a digital twin is really interesting and also like really creepy, right? Potentially. I mean, but fascinating because for a lot of reasons. Anyway, another evocative thought in that question.
Freaked out, or do you want to pass on this? Okay. Okay, so now we can go to the live audience members, in-person audience members. Okay, great. From the back, maybe just remind us who you are.
Hi, this is Vikram Venkatram from CSET at Georgetown University. Thank you so much for being here. This has really been a fascinating conversation. And I say also, it feels a little bit like meeting a celebrity, because growing up, I was actually one of probably the first users of Scratch as a kid. And I really enjoyed using it and got a lot of benefit from it. So thanks for that. My question is, as this workshop has gone on, I think two things we've talked about are building trust in the community. So as we gain these cutting edge medicines, how do we make sure that people use them, want to use them, are involved in the process? And then also building up talent and workforce and really inspiring young people to want to get involved and to build up the technical and interdisciplinary skills necessary to do some of this work. Listening to you all, it sounds like in a lot of cases, you really started small with a group of maybe super users, in Rob's case, you know, really, really passionate astronomers, in Emily's case, maybe patients or the family of patients. How do you go about growing that into wider, like community-wide impacts and really getting the message to as many people as possible? Thank you.
I think
So
comment
go
on just
first?
the piece. Oh,
No,
you go ahead.
No,
Rob.
go ahead, Emily. No, please.
Oh, I was just going to say just a quick piece on the building. I think others are probably better to speak to the building talent in the workforce. But just on the building trust piece within a disease community, I think some of the big principles for us are close connection with, you know, is co-production really with the community whose problem you're trying to solve. I think the importance of understanding what the needs are and deeply and meaningfully engaging that population throughout the production process. So not just as a checkbox at the end to say that, you know, you worked with patients, but really like making sure you're solving the right problem and every step along the way, making sure that you are understanding and also recognizing that patient populations may be bound by a similar disease, but it is a community of people from all different backgrounds with all different, you know, disease manifestations and stages. And there's a lot of diversity within a community too. And so one or two patients does not represent an entire community. And so really understanding the varied health needs among the whole community that you're trying to help is really important. But I think that co-production, I think working, you know, this is maybe a little bit more drug development specific, but working with the advocacy organizations in the space, building like showing investment in the community before, just not just right when you're trying to recruit for a trial, but like in the years leading up. And I just think like the like authenticity and depth of the relationship with the community is just really essential and really obvious as well. And when you bring meaningful value, because you have listened to the community, and even as it relates to how the drugs are formulated and how they're packaged and how the clinical trials are designed, that shows. And you can have the best drug ever, and if your clinical trial is impossible to participate in because you haven't gotten enough feedback from the patient community about challenges and whatnot of trials, no one's going to sign up for the trial. And so I think it is you do well by doing right by the community as well. I'll pass over to you now, Rob.
Yeah, so for establishing trust, it sort of harkens back to what I was talking about before about treating all of our participants equally, right? And not putting myself on that scientist pedestal. What really helps a lot, honestly, is admitting that I don't know the answer to a question. So, as much as I am a giant nerd of astronomy and know a lot of nerdy, really esoteric answers in general astronomy questions, I don't know everything. And I will say it outright, that's a great question. I don't know the answer. Let me get back to you. And I've actually had people come up to me after those talks saying, oh, that's nuts that you actually admitted that, And it's really hard for us to do because we want to be right all the time. So showing that vulnerability, I think, really helps a lot. In so much for community building, a lot of it for us is word of mouth and me giving talks, honestly. So I gave a talk last week at Georgetown, actually, to their astronomy club, and hopefully get some students involved in that. Or giving talks to astronomy clubs or various groups around virtually or in person. And that's been a majority of how I've been doing outreach and getting the word out about the project. The other biggest thing that really got the most number of users across the world was doing this big press release coupled with our big annual conference. So having that big press release, it got picked up by the press, and then we got some really great national and international coverage from that, and that got the word out to folks joining. Now it's kind of nicely taking care of itself. And, we don't have as giant numbers as like the Scratch Foundation, for example, but we're still getting, tens of folks signing up, if not hundreds of folks signing up every month or so. And it just sort of is taking care of itself, and people are getting the word out about this cool project. And we've been really leveraging that and relying upon that a lot.
Okay, so Margaret, how do you get 150 million kids and their teachers and their parents and caregivers to trust you to engage with the platform on a daily basis?
Good question. So first and foremost, I think the vast majority of the use of Scratch is driven by kids. They learn about it, they hear about it from each other. Yes, some of them discover it in school, but that kind of word of mouth and what they tell each other about what's cool and what's awesome and what they can do together online, I think is a big motivator. It's interesting because one of the things we're doing, like one of the things we're working on is thinking about what a family membership program might look like. Back to the question of revenue. How do we make sure we can keep this growing, amazing thing alive? And we realize, parents, they don't really know a whole lot about us. First of all, they think, oh, MIT, because MIT's been in our name for a long time. Oh, they're good. That's a real stamp of approval. I think often for kids who come home and say, Mom, we did this thing in school today, my teacher did this, Scratch. They're like, oh, great, your teacher did it? Fine. But I don't think they know tons about it. And we haven't, until very, very, very recently, had access to parents to be able to engage and tell them more. So I'm not sure. Yeah, I couldn't even define them as fans, really. I think if they were users, and are now parents, they might be fans. But so, Scratch is funny. And, I do think it goes back to like centering that core kind of human superpower. The fact that Mitch catalyzed so much more by making the original code open source. So it really created a coding movement for younger kids. That's what block-based coding is, right? And 3, the sort of policy levers, because we have not, like I said, we have not done marketing. Like we have not intentionally grown our community. We've built global programs with philanthropic support around the world, but that's very different. So, it's tapping into that, something that in our case, that young people really need and want.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Okay, other questions from the room? Yeah.
Hi, Laura Campbell here. So I'm wondering, I've really enjoyed the discussion of how you scaled your efforts, but I was wondering what funding did you get at first? How much and from whom or what or where? And what did you use it for? Because I'm thinking about some data-oriented sort of pan-biology projects that I think are starting to think about what they might do in terms of citizen science. And like, how much does it take to start and what do you do first? Thank you.
I can jump in here too. Our initial funding was all from individuals. We started, I feel a little bit like a broken record here, but we had no background in any of this. And so we started with the tools that we were comfortable with. So we filmed a video telling our story. We filmed it, my brother's ex-girlfriend's father was a photographer. We filmed it in his studio. It was like a painful process. We edited the video. My brother made the video, and he must have spent hundreds of hours at the Apple store, and the geniuses like helped edit because he had no background in video editing. I mean, it was really a comedy of errors. But I think that's kind of the point, which is that like you have no idea, we had no idea what we were doing, and we were figuring it out every step of the way. And so we made a video and we basically sent it out to everyone we knew and we posted it on social media. That was how we knew to communicate with people. And we asked them to give. And, to be honest, we were expecting to raise our goal. And we had a lot of family fights about this, was to raise $50,000 in the course of a year, because we actually weren't even intending to start a foundation at the time. We were planning to do a one-time campaign. And we thought it would like last for a while, but we wanted to hit 50,000 in the first year. And we were able to raise $40,000 in the first week. And we were just dumbfounded. I mean, we had never really fundraised before. And honestly, it was kind of an overwhelming experience. I'm actually not being so public about my CF experience is not a particularly comfortable place for me. And so I never talked like so publicly about it. And so the money came from just friends and family, and really centered around telling our story as authentically as we could, in a video made by our family and really my brother primarily. And so I will say that like the first 100,000 that you raise is the harder, like the more you make, it never gets easy, but it does get a little bit easier. And then we've also obviously diversified our revenue streams quite a bit since then. And, things a lot of things have gotten a lot easier. A lot of things have also gotten harder. But yeah, it was our initial core circle that really powered the start. And I think that it often is, you have to leverage the people that care and believe the most. And then just, we really compelled people. Our slogan in those early days, and this brings me back, was donate, pass it on, make a difference. And I think we really emphasized the passing it on, because it wasn't enough to just donate, but we really needed to reach our friends' friends and their friends. And we really did. But it was, we hustled, and you could not encounter anyone from my family at any minute of the day without us talking about Emily's Entourage. You have to become a real hustler and ambassador, and it infiltrates every minute of every day and every person, every conversation. It's kind of EE first always. So that was our start.
Next, yeah. So what we spent, the three major things we spend money on is people, so FTE, servers, and then also instrumentation. In our case, it's telescopes. So initially what we spent a lot of money on was, originally part of my time, part of my small schedule, then hiring a really gifted intern to do a lot of the initial software design and build up. To actually make that data reduction program and to spend his entire summer on it. And then I think we brought him back the next summer after that. And then sort of slowly expanding and sort of assessing what our needs are. So the next thing was to get servers to hold all of our data and to do a lot of the data processing, really the meta processing of all the hundreds of thousands of data sets we got from folks across the world. That necessitated us getting a software engineer to run the servers, to build the software and the framework for that. Then very quickly, we ran through our 11 years of data in about 10 to 12 months. Yeah, because we had a lot of people wanting to run through the data really quickly. And that was still when we had a data request system that allowed people to take out data once every week or once every 2 weeks. So we were chugging through our data. So we're like, okay, how do we get more data? Let's buy our own telescopes. So now we have a fleet of, let's see, 6 telescopes right now. We're hopefully going to have another 3, so up to 9 telescopes outside of Los Angeles that we're working on right now, that we're commissioning right now. That necessitated us to have an astronomer up there as well to help us build the operations and to run the telescopes. We have a communications expert that is trained in how best to interact with the community and to improve how well we interact with folks, but how to improve the project as a whole. What I'm looking forward to now is that, taking a step back, we've always been funded by NASA's Universal Learning. This is basically a collaboration of folks at Space Telescope up in Baltimore, NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, where I used to be outside of Los Angeles, Caltech, IPAC, and Harvard Smithsonian. And we were all work together to have, to make science more available for folks, to have those real science experiences. And I was very lucky that they started giving me a small amount of that funding at JPL to sort of put my foot in the door and to sort of grow this project and make it bigger and bigger. So it actually became the largest, in terms of funding, project at JPL. Now we're trying to take the next step. We're starting now to apply for our own funding. So actually, I just put in a proposal on Tuesday, actually literally this week, on NSpires, for those who use NSpires, yes, to request money for a postdoc and some summer interns. So it's like everyone's been saying, starting off very, very small and then sort of organically growing as your needs change and your needs increasing. And yeah, hopefully that's helpful.
Awesome. Margaret, did you have something to add? How did Scratch spin out?
So Scratch originally got its start, I think, as an NSF grant in Mitch's lab. And it definitely benefited from relationships that Mitch had developed with longtime companies and foundations that have been longtime supporters. And they really helped with the sort of transition from MIT to being an independent 501c3. But I think, it's hard to do this, but I think when you get to that point that we were at, migrating out of MIT to be freestanding, we really should have, one of the, it goes back to what we were talking about before, but one of the things we really should have done was put together kind of a sustainability strategy. How is that going to happen? Because Scratch's growth was already, it was becoming clear it was ticking up. And to support that in perpetuity on philanthropic dollars is probably not realistic. Philanthropic or in-kind, a lot of our compute costs are in-kind. But that, in my experience, that doesn't last forever. So I think that, thinking through kind of what is longer term sustainability strategy is critically important.
Awesome, thanks. Mike, do we have time for one more question? Okay, great. Judith.
Judith Burston, National Science Foundation. So I want to come back to the chemistry and medicinal space. When we think about chemistry as a discipline, and we think about particularly chemical manufacturing and pharmaceutical manufacturing, the way I see this is we may be both creating our own barriers to entry, but also there's this sense of enormous capital cost. I will say that I'm encouraged by hearing both Emily and then also James Lee yesterday talking about the rare disease space and how do you enter the space, use AI perhaps to make this a more accessible space. But what do we do as chemists? What advice can we get from those of you who have done this in interesting spaces? What can we learn from NASA and their incredible outreach activity, which I have to say I'm enormously jealous of? What do we do as a chemistry community and as a pharmaceutical community to drive forward the development of drugs in a way that's not too hugely capital intensive and also that allows entry to a broader range of people?
Give Rob one more second to think, and I'll rephrase. I love this question. Rob, what are the equivalent of our 6-inch telescopes?
This is a great question, and I wish it wasn't Friday at almost 3 p.m. because my brain is fried after this week. Yeah, I love the comment that you made about basically removing barriers for entry and really having a lot of humility about us and making sure that our citizen scientists know that we need them, not the other way around, right? That has really helped out a ton in fostering that sense of community of folks and getting them on board. Right, so the idea of the 6-inch telescopes, this is actually something that I've had to fight against, for the lack of a better term, against some of my peers, is that, professional scientists will have that sort of elitist mentality of you can't do science from Los Angeles. You can't do science or astronomy with small telescopes, very, very small telescopes, or, oh, these things aren't great, or, oh, those amateur astronomers don't know what they're doing. They do. They can and they are. And by acting like a scientist helped me out with that in the sense that I made the evidence. I grabbed as much evidence as I could. I said, here is a 6-inch telescope from Tucson, Arizona that is now over 30 years old. It has no calibrations. Look at the data quality here. Here's another telescope that someone bought to look at the sun. Now they're looking at exoplanets. Here's the data quality. Here's how much time it's saved. I actually did a peer-reviewed paper that in 2020, and doing that first author peer-reviewed paper to demonstrate the capability and the ability and the opportunity for these folks to get involved and help us out really helped out a lot. I think that's like one of my most highly cited papers now as a result, which is a very, very cool thing to do, I think. Yeah. So making sure that we're humble as scientists to make sure that people join and feel welcome to join and are looking forward to doing so. But also at the same time, leveraging our scientist backgrounds as well to push back on the community and push back on those previously, thought of notions that you need a giant 8-meter telescope like Keck on the top of Mauna Kea to do impactful science. It truly is that opportunity for everyone to get involved in. Unfortunately, I'm an astronomer, so my head is always up in the clouds, so I don't really know a really good what's your 6-inch telescope sort of application. But one good thing that could be happening is thinking of remember SETI at home, how that was a big thing about 20 years ago, where SETI basically had all this radio data and they farmed it out to each of us and we could run it as a screensaver on our computer. For the younger folks who've dialed in, a screensaver, I'm not going to explain, but look it up on Wikipedia. But basically, it was crowdsourcing computing time and power. So that could be something that you could consider doing. And that's actually something we're effectively doing ourselves, is we have that 11 years of data, hundreds of thousands of data sets, and we're effectively using our citizen scientists as cloud computing resources for free for us, and they're helping us compute that. So it could be something as simple as that, of just taking that data or that massive data analysis that you have, or even making it fully automated and making like a fun, maybe flying toaster screensaver or something like that for your purposes.
I can jump in here and talk a little bit about, I don't know specifically, I will leave it to you to apply this specifically to chemistry, but I think within the drug development space, some of the ways that I think we can reduce human capital and the financial resources and whatnot. And I mean, I certainly agree with removing some of the barriers for entry. I think making sure that we're targeting the right problems. I know I mentioned that before, but let's actually solve the most important things and make sure that we have the buy-in of the final end user. So we don't waste our time on problems that they don't actually think are that important to solve. That sounds obvious. I can't tell you how many times I hear about people solving problems that I just don't think are that meaningful to the community and that the data doesn't show are very meaningful to the community. I also think there are ways that we can de-risk the space. I mean, we've seen incredible examples of this in the CF world through venture philanthropy and whatnot, where different groups have shouldered some of the initial risk. We did this with with the company that we spun out. We, funded, we gave an initial investment and to generate the data and move it through faster, and then it got additional funding and got acquired and now is in a clinical trial. And so I do think there are creative ways to de-risk some of the really expensive early work. I also think that there are tremendous policy regulatory changes that can change the game. I mean, we've seen this in the past for drug development for rare diseases, and then some there are tons of different policy regulatory changes that could impact this, but just some very specific things, and these are sort of low-hanging fruit, is even just being clear to companies about the data that's needed up front, so that it's not they produce data, they go meet with the FDA, and then they learn that they need a lot more data, and then they go back and have to rerun all these experiments and trials and whatnot. Little things like that, I think, can be super helpful. Also, there's a lot of innovation to be made with clinical trial designs. And Marty probably knows what I'm talking about here, but, particularly in the rare disease space, ways that we can make clinical trials go faster for ultra rare populations, have natural history data serve as a control. There's a lot of opportunity and a lot of need in that space. And then finally, just around data sharing, we this weekend are actually launching a new program called our Gene Therapy Consortium, where we're bringing clinical stage gene-based therapy companies together and talking about safety data. This is not something that companies often share with each other, but I think the more we can push, change the culture and force sharing of lessons learned and data, the faster we'll be able, the faster, more efficiently we'll be able to develop drugs, but also like the better we'll be able to promote the well-being and safety of patients. And that is so, so critical. And then there's also tremendous opportunity. I mean, I'm sure you guys have talked about this throughout the conference around, utilizing AI for like drug screening and optimizing molecular structures and chemistry. I think there's huge potential there, but you all know much more about that than I do.
Thanks so much, Emily. So, Margaret, I want to answer this last question. There was a time where a computer required a whole room. And there was also a time in the non-post-Scratch world that we now live in where the idea that kids could code was preposterous. It was one of very complex, like a language that only a few people in the world could speak. How did Scratch fundamentally disrupt those assumptions so that now we just take it for granted that kindergartners can teach us how to code?
Well, what I would say is, I think it goes back to the very foundational belief that led to the creation of Scratch, which is, children have a tremendous amount of inherent creativity and possibility within them. And if you think about the design of tools in such a way that they create an accessible pathway to entry, then amazing things can happen. And, Scratch Scratch as we know it started with Mitch, but Mitch, of course, was a student of Seymour Papert. Seymour originated Logo back in the day, which really was kind of the first really simplified coding language for young children. And I remember visiting Mitch. This was right when Scratch was kind of taking shape at the Media Lab. And he said to me, my new project is really kind of building on Seymour's work and creating a sort of visual approach to coding. And, at the time, Mitch has been working with Lego for 40 some odd years now. And I think, like the brick, right? It's there. It's kind of the thing you code with in Scratch. The blocks, we call them, but they're like Lego bricks. So, lots of synergies. But I think there was a community at MIT that believed very much in the power and possibility of what young people could do if you give them the right tools in the right context to support their engagement and learning. And I think, the broader context that both Seymour and Mitch brought into that equation through their work with Lego was that, playfulness, joy, delight, it needs to be an inherent part of that. And listening to Rob and Emily on this panel, right, I hear that so much in your work. There's so much passion, so much connection, so much, right, emotion. And anyway, but the one thing I would go back to saying previously is I think we have an opportunity to do this, and we're working on how to do this and try to find a little bit of support so we can do it well. But, with 100, with 1 billion projects on Scratch, you can imagine we have tons of data. And we really want to make it accessible to researchers more broadly, particularly researchers that are interested in understanding that Scratch has a distinctive approach to learning that we can leverage and learn much more from if we dig. And I think both of you were mentioning the power and possibility of what can happen if, in the same way that happens with open source code, right? If you make your data available more broadly to people, it can be a very powerful way to further transformation. So.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Just to wrap us up, I think we started with this premise, we all want to be healthy. I think it's very interesting to take a moment to think about what is that we. So 8 billion human imaginations across the globe, 350 million only in the US. currently, those of us who can go into a lab or a space and actually make a medicine, we fit in one building. I've run the numbers. Now, it's a tall building, but it's one building. So therefore, by definition, 99.99999% of all the human imagination and creativity potential that exists on our planet, arguably our greatest natural resource, the thing that AI can't yet do, is not being tapped. So to Emily, Margaret, and Rob, thank you so much for sharing your stories and inspiring us to dream about a world where anyone can help us discover tomorrow's medicines, and lots of lessons and tips and guidance to figure out how we could get there. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.
All right, I'm turning this back over to Mike to
Well,
bring
no, I
it
was
home.
going to leave it. So all we had left was like any concluding remarks from you and Nikki. I think you just nailed it. If you'd like to finish the meeting on that note and just adjourn. Nikki has something to say.
Yeah, so I would just say that it's not just children that have creativity. We all do. And there's probably beyond even humans that have creativity, but just focusing on the humans for this, I hope you leave thinking that, part of the points I saw this afternoon too is like a single person can make a difference. You start out small, you build community, right? And we are part of this community, and National Academies is building these communities. And Emily too said, you can be surprised what you can do with that sense of community. And I think we need to never forget that, regardless of what we read on the news or what we hear, et cetera, is the most powerful thing, is that connection to fellow human beings and that humanity. And that is where I hope you go to that, since I was part of the positive future, I'm glad we are ending on a positive note, because that is exactly what that kind of spirit is what we need, multiplied 8-10 billion times to get to that positive future of 2050. And so that's also a great way of going to the next theme for the next wave of webinars and workshops, is getting there to that vision of 2050. And it's going to take every single one of us in this room and beyond to build that society we want to live in.
Awesome. It just leads me then to wrap up. Huge thanks to Mike and Kay and Darlene and the entire National Academy team who supported us for the last 2 days. Thank you to everybody who participated both live and online. Just a phenomenal 2 days. We really appreciate the discussion, and obviously so much important work to do moving forward. So thank you everyone for your participation. Thanks so much.
Meeting adjourned.